the university is basically saying, well, look, you really are truly a amateur athlete. We don't have any claims for this. How are they really taking that response?
I think it is, in a way, offensive to the players because it does sort of degrade the value of their athletic contribution to the school. At the end of the day, even if it isn't Power 5, it is Ivy League basketball, and that is a significant league.
Well, really thank you for joining me on the Sports Talk podcast. I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about this thing regarding Dartmouth in particular, and you have been at the forefront of covering Dartmouth sports in general, and particularly the push by the Players Union to seek representation, which is now currently at the National Labor Relations Board, and I think they're seeking it through Service Employees International. So my first question around this is, were you surprised by the players' action, especially considering what happened at Northwestern some years ago?
I think I definitely was surprised. On campus, there's not too much attention paid to the basketball team, but I think they sort of had an increased spotlight just because they filed a petition to unionize. I actually had not known about Northwestern's unionization efforts prior to Dartmouth doing the same thing. So I wasn't really surprised just because I didn't know any better. But as soon as I looked into it, it did seem surprising, as the NLRB had rejected Northwestern's attempt to unionize. But then, as you probably know, in 2021, the NLRB sort of took back their statement and argued that the National Labor Relations Act was actually in favor of student athletes being employees. And so they were almost calling out for a team. Dartmouth was just the first to do it, to sort of meet with them and unionize. So,
No, yeah, it's true, because the Northwest, before we get into Dartmouth, the Northwestern thing is pretty interesting because I think they would have supported it at the time. I think if I remember correctly, they talked about, like, if we did this, then it would create this uneven playing field, which college sports in general is uneven in my estimation, but that's for another story. But in terms of what's happening on campus, or even before we get to campus, what do you think led to this push for unionization? Because one of the interesting things that I think is missing, or at least I haven't seen from the national media in particular, is like this human interest angle. Like why Dartmouth players in particular are pushing for this? Like what led them to this?
Yeah, I think it's a number of factors. Originally, the players weren't too open about speaking about it with me. They've since sort of opened up as it has hit the national spotlight. But the first is sort of, as an Ivy League school, we're different from Northwestern in that across the Ivy League, there are no scholarships for sport. It's a need-based scholarship. So it comes down to financials rather than performance.
Right.
And so I think they feel in that way they're not being compensated for the sport they're playing. They're sort of on level with other students who are here on need-based aid. And it sort of, in a way, violates all the efforts they put into the team and put into just being an athlete. Because being an athlete at a Division I school, even if it is an Ivy League and there's less, you're only allowed 20 hours per week to play your sport at an Ivy, unlike Big Ten schools like Northwestern, where players can play up to 60 hours a week.
Right.
So these players sort of felt, hey, I'm being put at a disadvantage in classes, and sometimes I'll have to miss classes for practice or games, and so the compensation, they argue, should be there.
It's a kind of interesting argument because one of the things that I look at here, obviously, as you rightly point out, there's no compensation in terms of scholarships awarded with the Ivy League. And if you read so there's like 240-page reports that went to the labor union, and are operating an amateur structure when we think about collegiate athletics, which is not something I really think Power Five conferences in particular, which includes the Big Ten, can really make a case for, especially given the kind of large revenues here. And they're saying we're running a basketball program that doesn't really make revenue. But the players in particular are saying, but look, we're bringing some level of prestige. And so it's interesting that that's the way in which they were thinking about it, right? Because they're, the university is basically saying, well, look, you really are truly a amateur athlete. We don't have any claims for this. How are they really taking that response?
I think it is, in a way, offensive to the players because it does sort of degrade the value of their athletic contribution to the school. At the end of the day, even if it isn't Power Five, it is Ivy League basketball, and that is a significant league. If you look at sort of the parity across leagues, the Ivy League falls about halfway. So there are leagues worse than the Ivy League, and even I don't know if you know, but Princeton last year made the
Yeah.
March Madness tournament and made it all the way to the Sweet 16. So I think players are specifically pointing at Princeton and saying we can compete with bigger teams,
Right.
and in that way, the case that the college makes, which is that they're amateurs, is a little bit contradictory.
No, I definitely take that point because I think when universities make arguments about, well, we're not making money, sometimes those are funny accounting practices anyway, but also they operate these sporting outfits not just only to provide students opportunities to participate in sports, but there's a larger kind of light that's shone on the university, especially. And you think about Princeton, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Princeton just knock off a team early this week or last week as well? And so there's something that people latch onto when they see these things, and so I don't necessarily think they're making any. I think the universities are on shaky footing when we think about it. Yes, it's not the same level of revenue that we're seeing now, and in particular with NIL coming in and so on. But NIL is not necessarily for the universities; it's for the players
Yeah.
in particular. But the big type of TVDs that's coming out, especially in Power Five conferences, and if you notice recently, like even the Big Ten with this expansion of USC and UCLA and so on, it's somewhat different than the Ivy League, obviously, but it doesn't mean that these students aren't doing a service that will bring broad attention to the
Yeah.
university, even in light of great academics, right? Yeah. So I wonder if you could give me a sense of the campus reaction to this. Well, I mean, how do people on campus are thinking through this? Clearly, the university administration disagrees. They point out that they support unions, but they don't necessarily think this is a case for unionization. But
Yeah, I think there is sort of a different sentiment, and I don't want to generalize.
right.
But typically, I think athletes are in favor of basketball's push, or at least intrigued by it. And then sort of the general student body is sort of like, whoa, where is this coming from? Because I think students see that athletes are, in a way, compensated with free merchandise, and they get training support, and they get to use a better gym and nutritionist. So in a way, they think, oh, okay, the athletes are sacrificing some time they could spend on school or socializing or elsewhere, but they do receive this compensation, and they also get to come to a prestigious university, as it does help admissions. The college is sort of making a claim that the athletes are fully students and they didn't get bolstered in admissions, but for many of them, it does help to have a coach's support. And then on the athlete side, at least the basketball team specifically is, of course, in support as they all sign the petition. Um, but many of them, at least for basketball specifically, I think 11 of the 15 work on campus jobs in addition
Mhm.
to playing basketball. So one of their arguments is that, hey, we have to do what a student does, take classes. We have to do what a student worker does, work. And on top of this, we have to play basketball, and we're not compensated for that aspect of things.
Yeah, and pretty heavy load as well. I mean, you've been covering it. Anybody who plays sports at the collegiate level, it's almost akin to professional sports. I'm not labeling it as professional sports, but they have to put in a significant amount of time, and it's not like they go off and sleep. They have to go back to class. They have to study, and they don't give away grades for free. I don't think at Dartmouth, right? So
No.
you have to work hard, right?
Yeah.
No, that's an interesting case. So, is there any traction? If you've talked to anybody else on campus, other athletes in general, are you thinking that others will sign on to this, or are they waiting and see? Is it a wait and see approach?
I think they are generally for now waiting. The college's lawyers that pushed back. I think that was just a little over a month ago. So I think other teams there may be discussions. I haven't really spoken to them, but for now they're sort of slow to do the same thing and petition. I think they're waiting to see what the NLRB will do. But as many sources have pointed out, it's going to be a years long process that probably won't be resolved for quite a while. So.
Yeah, it will probably take some time. Some of these players probably won't be around, but obviously they would be participating in something that could potentially change the landscape of sports in the United States.
Yeah.
Are they optimistic? Are the players thinking they have a good case? I read the brief; it looked really solid. Obviously, you can't really judge by that, obviously, because when it gets in front of the board, it's another question. And the university is trying to make a case. Albeit somewhat of a weak one, I think. I think if you make the case that this is a non-revenue sport, then I think you're saying like, well, if we were making revenue, it's a possibility. That's how I would interpret it. Maybe that's a little bit simplistic, but you don't want to make that claim, I don't think, if you are the university. But in the brief, they're sort of making that claim. So are the players optimistic that this might occur? And what are even your thoughts on it, if I could get you to speculate?
No, I think they are somewhat optimistic. I think the college's ruling took it a step back, but at the end of the day, it's a union that they petitioned with the NLRB, who, as I said, in 2021 was pro-employee status. In the landscape of Dartmouth, being in the Ivy League, which is 8 private institutions. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but Northwestern, part of the reason the NLRB ultimately vetoed the union was because though Northwestern is a private university, other Big Ten schools are not. And so the NLRB didn't have jurisdiction over those public schools. That would go to public labor laws. And then also at Dartmouth, there's been union efforts before that have been successful by dining workers and library workers, and even last year, graduate students successfully collectivized. So I think there is still hope. The college's ruling ultimately is the college. It doesn't dictate how the NLRB feels, and they're the ultimate decider.
I know you might not know this or might be willing to share, but have any of the players mentioned to you that they've been gotten calls from administrations to walk this back, or have they just created a big line between the university and the players in general?
They have been pretty quiet, so I haven't sort of heard if they've done that or not. I know news media outlets were reaching out to them, but as far as administration, I'm not quite sure.
No, I mean, I think this is a tremendous kind of an early impact into what may happen in for the future. I think college sports in general is ripe for a lot of interesting changes. I think even people are talking for wanting, if we go to things like NIL, they're wanting some form of oversight, and people labeling that as the wild west, which I'm okay with it for now. I understand that the long-term viability of college sports might change, or there might be shifting natures, but it's often interesting when players are the ones who are asking for more for themselves, whether that being through being represented by a union or getting some form of compensation for the image and likeness. We often get this pushback or this big upheaval as if they're doing something wrong. So it's interesting, and I'll definitely want to keep abreast of this. I'm waiting to see whenever some rulings comes out on this. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you're right that NIL serves as a good precedent for this effort. It was sort of a decade-long struggle for student athletes if they want to be called that versus employees. If they could benefit off their name, image, and likeness. And so I think the 2021 ruling does provide some positivity for athletes being more so employees than they are students and being able to.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about NIL is that look, the NCAA for many years just took your image, right? They decided what they wanted to do, and I remember the O'Bannon case, and Ed O'Bannon was this famous UCLA star, and he went home and he saw his friend playing a video game, and you can't get anything from that. And so I think it's fine, right? In my estimation. Now I understand a lot of athletic departments, and I talked to some of those folks. They think the money that would come to them are now going straight to the universities, and in some universities, the booster stuff is much bigger than others. So I do understand from a recruiting standpoint to get an athlete to come to your university. They're thinking about what kind of structure you can put in place to ensure that I earn some money. And yeah, I imagine they'll sort that out, but that's to me the least of the problem right
Yeah,
now. I mean, I think the whole idea of college sports in general is just the professionalization of it seems farcical to me in the sense that we've now gotten to a stage where, I don't know if you just saw was it the Texas A&M coach that's been, his compensation, the amount of money, the facilities, the things that they're spending. We've long gone behind this idea that it's amateur, right?
yeah,
I'm not saying student athletes have to get a salary, but when you were making millions of dollars off television contracts and revenue and merchandise, it's only fair that we start to think about systems to put in place to ensure that these students can reap some of it probably now and maybe into the future. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that's sort of a point the college was making October 5th when they sort of just disagreed with the basketball team's union. As we've said, I do put Ivy League basketball up with Power Five conferences, not at the
Yeah.
same level, but able to sort of hang with them. But the college says if we look at Dartmouth players, they typically don't go on to NBA or professional careers as a Duke player or a Purdue basketball player might. And then the players actually rebounded saying, okay, maybe we are a non-revenue sport, but we get donations from basketball alumni donors. I know there was, I forget, a few $1 million were donated by a Dartmouth alum who I think is a co-owner of the Celtics.
Mm.
And so that is significant. It's not included in the college's calculation of basketball's revenue, but it is tangential and related, in my opinion.
No, yeah, I mean, there's different ways in which they collect money, and they don't want to tell you sometimes, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But I hope it works out, and we'll see. I think a lot of people are thinking college sports in general will change in the next how many years, and we'll see. But I really
Absolutely.
want to thank you for spending a little time joining me on the channel, talking through this. And what are you working on now? What kind of news articles do you have coming up next?
Yeah, so I'm taking a little break just because it is Thanksgiving
All
and
right.
Dartmouth winter. But I have to finish my game recap from Saturday's game. Dartmouth
Uh,
football beat Brown, and it made them the Ivy League champion. So
yeah, that's good. I actually didn't see that game, or I
yeah,
think I saw one Ivy League game this year, but I maybe have to catch up. Does it make them bowl? How they don't participate in bowls, right? Does it
they
have
do
to be
not.
part of? No.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. But that's cool. Yeah. But thank you so much for joining me, Will. I wish you a great Thanksgiving, and I'll keep you posted, obviously, once we put this up on the channel. And, maybe if things change, and I'll hope to get you on back and we can talk some more. Yeah.
My pleasure.